Welcome to build episode number 3 of the N57 8-speed 60 series Land Cruiser. In this video, we're going to fit every accessory necessary to go four-wheel driving.
5 teams, 5 unique builds. We've gathered a bunch of our great mates to take on Tasmania's toughest terrain, testing their skills, their rigs, and their resilience, all in support of men's health this Movember. This is Kincrome Buildwars.
I've been given a 30k budget to build a four-wheel drive to take on some of Tassie's toughest tracks against some of the best four-wheel drive content creators in the country. This is a budget build, but this series gives me an opportunity to show you exactly what's possible when you make absolutely everything yourself. We've already completed the engine conversion and it's already turnkey, so make sure you go check out the other 2 videos on my channel if you haven't already. I want a really cool looking front bar for this build, and to save some money, we're going to design and fabricate our own. Sounds easy, right? Well, the reality is this took us 3.5 days on CAD to get something we were happy with. This is our design for the front bar. We've kept it clean and simple. We've incorporated a winch, a light bar, and a recovery point. I'm pleased with this design, however, this is not what we set out to build at the start. Let's wind back the clock and explain. I really wanted an OG style steel bumper which looked like this with a winch in it, but mounted a little bit closer to the car. I put a call out on the socials asking for a 3D scan of a bar, and Scott from Stowaway Outdoors kindly did a scan for us of his beautiful looking 60 series.
Rightio, that's the scan all done. I'm going to process it now and send it off to Richard. Hopefully it's everything he needs. He has a very cool idea for what he's going to do with it, and I can't wait to see it.
We tried to make it work, but top down the curve through the front and the curved end caps would be really hard to manufacture out of sheet metal. So we ended up designing it differently, and hence we got to the design you're looking at right now. Time to make CAD a reality, and we headed down to LCS 4x4 because I didn't have any 5mm steel at home or the tooling to do the long folds across the front of the bar. We could have altered the design accordingly to do it with my tooling at home, but we would have had to make it in more pieces, which would have meant more chance of manufacturing errors and more welding and grinding. Massive shout out to Laurie from LCS 4x4 for making this happen. We managed to save a fair bit of money making a bar ourselves instead of buying one. Alrighty, let's glue this thing together. The bar was fully welded off now, and we could begin the sanding process, which started with a flappy disc on an angle grinder before we moved to an orbital sander with some 240 grit on it. Once we were happy with how it was looking, we mocked it up on the car. To do this, we had to remove the standard mounts, which meant drilling out the rivets. We were planning on using these holes again, so we took extra care. The bar then went off to get powder coated, and once it was back we could install the winch and then mount it on the car for the final time. I was using a Carbon Scout Pro 12 winch. This has a 7 horsepower motor and a reasonably high line speed for a low mount. This is my first low mount winch, and I was really impressed with it after extensively testing it down in Tassie. Make sure you tune into the Tassie series to see it in action. We also got an air free spool solenoid for the winch, which would eventually be hooked up to the air compressor. This is a pretty cool feature and it certainly makes life on the tracks a lot easier. Next on the menu were some light bar mounts. We wanted to mount this as low as possible so we didn't restrict airflow to the heat exchangers, and we'd spent half a day designing and manufacturing some fancy sheet metal brackets. If you're enjoying my design, engineering and fabrication style of content, it'd be amazing if you could subscribe to the channel and like this video. It'll help with the mysterious YouTube algorithm more than you know, which will in turn allow me to make more videos like this. We were using a steady 22-inch light bar for this build, and I'd opted for a light bar instead of spotlights because I like the look a lot more. That's the bar done, and I was pretty chuffed on how it turned out. Shout out to my intern Tom, who did the CAD work on this one. One last thing to make it operational, we had to mount the winch solenoid, which would sit in the front passenger side of the engine bay. The total price for the front bar, including labour, winch, light bar and material, was around $8,000. It took 36 hours to do this, so pretty much a whole week of labour to complete. Costs around $300 in sheet metal. Honestly, it's not that unreasonable if you compare it to some of the upper end bars on the market, especially given ours is completely custom and a one-off. I need to mount a UHF on the 60, and I'm really lucky because I have a half-built car lying around the shed, which basically hasn't had any accessories mounted to it yet, but I do have them all. So I have a GME UHF to put on the 60, and Toons, if you're watching this, I'd love another one of these for the other 40. Where to mount it though? Well, I have a fully manualized transfer case now, so I no longer need this switch. I based my UHF mount off the switch design, and I knew the clips would need a little tuning to get right. I printed it out of PLA a few times, making millimeter changes each time. Once I was happy with the clip dimensions, I then printed it out of PCCF, which is polycarbonate carbon fibre, and I was really happy with the print quality of the Prusa. Alright, time to install it now. Have a listen to this click. And I had to drill a hole to mount the antenna. I also mounted the unit under the dash so it's nice and concealed. These UHFs RRP for $820. I used about $50 worth of material to make the 3D printed part, and it took 4 hours of my time to get it exactly right. I need to mount an air compressor to power my lockers and winch air free spool. I managed to pick up an ARB twin compressor off my neighbour George for $600. The twins have a fan on them, and I think it's recommended that it's not supposed to be mounted in the engine bay because of that fan, but I'm doing it anyway because there's no great place to mount it in the car unless it's in the boot, but then I'd have to run a lot of plumbing and wiring. I also don't ever intend to get this car in water over bonnet. There's a prime piece of real estate above the passenger side fender, which you can see here. This is the bracket we came up with. Looks pretty simple, but the compressor is heavy, so it needs to be quite strong. Also, the fender is on an angle, so we had to make the returns different lengths, which should pick up on existing factory bolt holes if we got our measurements right. That's the air compressor mounted up now, and all up it was about 1.5 hours work to design, build and fit that bracket, and about $20 worth of material. Time to get into the wiring, and the first job is to remove all the old obsolete wires. Once that was done, I could move on to mounting the Carlin switches. I had this clock/weird storage thing in the dash which lived here, and it seemed like a pretty good spot for some switches. Looks like a good opportunity for a 3D print. After measuring it up with the verniers, I came up with a rough design which had 5 spots for the switches. Time to hit the print button on the first prototype. This part is designed to clip into the dash, so it requires some tuning. If you're able to get something like this right first go, you're doing much better than I am. Every print I did, I learnt something and I changed it accordingly by 0.5 millimeter or so. Eventually, I got it dialed in, and when I did, I printed it out of polycarbonate carbon fibre on the Prusa printer. I was pretty chuffed about the way this turned out, as it will look pretty well integrated into the dash. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. It almost looks like it was meant to be. Let's move on to the dash.
Alrighty, so dash setup, I know what you're thinking. How are we going to do it? The answer is Haltech UC10. Now, this isn't actually mine. It's for another build that I have. And it's not going to be part of this car. I'm just going to loan it to the car. So I've got these dash inserts, and these are sold through www.lcs4x4.com.au. All we've got to do is remove this, screw that in, and we're gravy.
It only requires one wire from the BMW computer, and I would recommend going down this path for a conversion. I'll have to buy one of these eventually, obviously, but damn, this lone part is looking pretty at home here. I was really happy to have my mate Dylan helping me with the wiring, as normally it's something I would outsource. I didn't feel much of it, if I'm honest, but it took quite a lot of time. I'd say at least 3 days work all up. We used a power distribution block and tidied up the whole engine bay. Wiring all up can be pretty costly, but I genuinely had a lot of the stuff lying around the shed. It took around 3 days labour and around $400 worth of material. I'm not exactly sure what an auto elec would bill for this sort of thing, so take these numbers with a grain of salt. I'm really lucky with this build. I have a heap of stuff lying around my shed. Now, these were actually for building up my Ranger. So what these are is the Toyo Open Country Mud Terrain, and they're on the Dirty Life DT4. So these actually are pretty cool because you can run them as bead-locked or non-bead-locked, and they're completely legal and compliant. So I can put a lock ring on if we're going on some hard tracks. Otherwise, I can keep them visually looking awesome with this ring here. To increase the car's capability, realistically, wheels and tyres are probably the best upgrade you can do. Five Toyo tyres fitted to the Dirty Life rims came to $4,200 all up. This was technically out of the stuff lying around my shed budget, which gets counted towards the budget at a rate of half the RRP. Massive shout out to Rowan at Tyre Power Eltham for fitting these tyres up. I'm pretty happy with the way the 60 is looking now.
Alrighty, time to do suspension in the 60. Now, I would absolutely love to put this thing on an 80 chassis, as I've already said, but I'm just out of time. We're going to keep it simple at the moment, and we're going to keep this build leaf spring. I think this is around the $2,500 mark. We're going to do this on the ground today, so obviously it'd be really nice to have a hoist, but you can do this sort of stuff on the ground at home. So this is a 2-inch lift, nothing crazy, has to be legal. And I've got a few helping hands today, so Glenn and George, shout out to you guys for helping me out. I've never done leaf springs, I've never owned a leaf spring vehicle before, well, a complete leaf spring vehicle. Once the springs are done, I'll be able to measure my tail shafts, and then I can cut and shut them, and then we can go driving.
There's a bit of a process involved here. The suspension needs to go in first so I can measure my tail shaft lengths. Once I've got the lengths, I can then make the tail shafts, and once I have the tail shafts, then I can make an exhaust. They're all kind of dependent on each other, and you're about to see why. Replacing the leaf springs is a reasonably straightforward job. Unbolt the old spring and shock and replace it with the new Tough Dog gear. I did a bit of Googling and saw a suspension install for Leafs could be around $600 plus the $2,500 for the kit, meaning the RRP on this would be $3,100. Once the rear was done, we could rinse and repeat on the front end. And I'm also putting on a brand new Tough Dog steering dampener. Ooh, have a look at this. The 60's starting to look pretty flash. Alrighty, so suspension's in. Thank you, Tough Dog. Next up, we've got to do tail shaft length. So I'm going to measure, and then I can cut and shut my tail shafts. To complete the driveline for my engine conversion, I need tail shafts. Unfortunately, the stock ones don't quite work. We've replaced, the motor, the gearbox, the transfer. Obviously, we've made a custom cross member. And I've run some quick maths where I've measured up the current tail shafts and measured the distance that I need. And the rear one will actually work, I hope. When I did those numbers, I've accounted for the amount of plunge that I'll incur because of the leaf springs. So because of the way the shackle works on the leaf springs, it's going to be moving backwards and forwards, kind of like a pendulum. And that means the tail shafts actually grow and contract quite a lot. So I think that the rear it's pretty much standard length with a 79 series transfer. Now the front is not. This is my front shaft. This is actually a front shaft out of an 80 series. This is a 60 series end and it fits into the slip joint, which is awesome. But what I need to do is cut about 33 mil out of this. And when I say about, I mean exactly 33 mil. To go to a driveline joint, you're paying quite a bit of money for a tail shaft. We don't have any money left in the budget, so there's only really one option, which is to cut and shut our way out of this. I first tried to cut the tail shaft in the bandsaw, but due to the yoke design, I wasn't able to clamp it completely perpendicular, which is absolutely paramount to ensuring it remains balanced. So I 3D printed some spaces which allowed the shaft to be clamped perpendicular to the blade, and then I let it rain. I spent quite a while cleaning it up so I could remove the old shaft from the stub to ensure I could get good penetration in the welds. I then used a sophisticated system of my 3D printed jigs and window packers on my welding table to align it before I did my first pass with a TIG. I then did a second pass with a MIG for good measure. Build log update, just me and my first welded tail shaft. Hopefully it doesn't snap. See you on the tracks, lads. I put the tail shafts back on the car temporarily before I pulled the diff centers out so I could start fabricating an exhaust. Because I was running the exhaust down the driver's side, it would run really close to the tail shaft, and it's really important to have the front shaft in for mock-up so I could check the clearances. The rear was less so important, but I just wanted to see if it would work. All up, this job was free. It only took me 2 hours of my time. I'm not exactly what a tail shaft joint would charge, but in the past, I've paid a lot more than this. They are doing a much better job than I am though, and they're also balancing it. I probably wouldn't do this if it was a rear shaft, but given it's a front shaft and it's not rotating the whole time, I'm not too stressed about it. The front one will only really be spinning at those lower four-wheel driving speeds. It won't matter as much because it's generally those higher speeds where the unbalance starts to show. We are one half-assed exhaust away from driving this thing. And all we've got to do now is bring an exhaust from that dump pipe up there, all the way through here. And I'm lucky I have a heap of stuff lying around. I did have to pick up this. This is a brand new V-band clamp from SS Customs. But otherwise, this is all old, like it looks new, but it was in that bag. I also picked up a generic muffler for about $100 off eBay. I needed to weld in some bosses for these sensors, so out comes the Kincrome Christmas tree bit.
This is old school fab, not much done in CAD. Obviously the mounts you do in CAD and got a cool cutout on that one. But basically just using window packers to get everything the right height. Then I can pull it off the car to weld off. The exhaust, I was running out of time on this one and I stopped filming completely. But all up, including the mounts and the weld off, the exhaust took me pretty close to 2 days, so 16 hours of labor. All up, I reckon a fully custom exhaust like this would be around the $3,000 mark, but because I did it all myself and I had a heap of stuff lying around, I got out of it for around $100. We interrupt this video to let you know that the Kincrome Advent Calendar is back. I really rate these and every year I find a new spot for my mini toolkit that I never knew I needed. There are over 90k in prizes to be won and all you have to do is buy an Advent Calendar and find the gold tools to win. Tools are not as delicious as chocolate, but they're arguably more useful, so make sure you go pick one of these up. Check out all the details on the Kincrome website. Also, Buildwars is for Movember, so donate if you would like to support a good cause. Lockers are a must if you're building an actual four-wheel drive. Along with wheels and tyres, they are really one of the biggest upgrades you can do for capability. They can also be really expensive, but there are some good ways to do them on a budget, and I'm going to show you how. Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, went down too far.
Oh bro, look at that.
No, it's like we've
That's
done this
easy as
before.
YouTube. Engineers can't use tools though, you gotta remember that. First step is to pull the diff center out. On the front end of the 60, it wasn't so easy though. To get the diff center out, I had to take the axles out, and to do this, to my dismay, the swivel hubs had to come apart because of the brake guard and brake line setup on the 60. All I had to do was actually unclip a brake line, but all the fittings were old and seized, and I really would have had to replace all the brake lines if I'd gone down that path. The bearings in the swivel hubs look pretty good, so I didn't run a rebuild kit through them, as I won't put that many Ks on this 60 chassis. It'll be swapped out for an 80 in no time. So Hayden from LCS has installed my lockers. So I've got an auto locker on the rear and I've gone for an air locker on the front. And that's just to give me a bit more control. From what I understand, the auto lockers are pretty much locked all the time. So it seems like a pretty good option. This was a second-hand ARB air locker off Marketplace. It was $600. I got that off a gentleman off Marketplace for $200. So pretty reasonable for a set of lockers. I managed to trade a Honda CRF 250 for some labour on the lockers, which means I didn't have to pay a cent. Now I can stick it all back together, and the mechanics watching will likely say I've put way too much gasket maker on, but I don't ever want to do this job again. Hopefully, see you never, front diff center. If you're going to pull the diff centers out like I did, I think you could probably expect to pay $300 per end for a locker install. I basically ended up rebuilding my swivel hubs here, which you shouldn't have to do, and I'm not going to count that into the labour costs, but it burnt close to 2 days for me, which I was not super happy about at the time. Dual battery time, so I've got 110 amp hour lithium that has just been lying around. Dual battery install took around 4 hours and about $20 in material. I bought the DC-DC charger for $190. I did have the battery lying around, so I got out of this pretty cheap, but the RRP on something like this would be around $2,000. After the dual battery was complete, I put down the camera to work on the car and ended up in Tassie about 3 weeks later. The car was complete and driving, but I hadn't had much sleep in the past 3 weeks. I'd missed out on filming so many jobs, so I'm just going to have a quick recap of some things that I missed and show you some complete shots of the vehicle. Here's a finished shot of the engine bay, and it's not a bad looking engine bay at all. There's a heap of space in there. The N57 looks right at home, almost as if it was meant to be. I did attempt to fit the X5 seats at some point, but there would have been a lot of cutting and shutting required, so we decided not to in the interest of time. And the problem we have is that the trans tunnel rib is too wide, so we're going to bolt the 60 series seats in for this trip, and then later when I put this on an 80 chassis, we'll do some cutting and shutting. Might have to reprint this fascia. There's quite a bit of work to do it, but it's definitely possible. So the inside of the car does look kind of resto-moddy, and I'd actually 3D printed a blank to cover up the computer, but the print failed 10 minutes before we were due to leave, so it does look a little bit janky for now. That's pretty much the car. I mean, we haven't done a rear bar. That's probably one of the main things that I regret. The 60s have quite a lot of rear overhang, and unfortunately we didn't get time to do a rear bar. Apart from that, the 60 was pretty off-road ready.
Let's have a look at the final cost of this build now. All right, let's get into the budget. This is what you've all been waiting for. How much did this thing actually cost me? Just so you're aware, in this tally, I'm including everything, including the flights to Sydney to pick this thing up, the Uber rides, the rego, the material cost from all the parts we made, the cost of parts that I purchased. The only thing I'm not including is that Haltech UC10, as it's genuinely on loan. I've done my fair share of wheeling and dealing on this build, and I got rid of the 3F, the auto, the transfer, the rims for $2,500. Also, engineering. We came to the consensus at the start of this series that we wouldn't have to count it towards the budget, and that was really, really lucky for me. The cost of engineering also seems to vary quite a lot from state to state, so I think you could probably expect anywhere from like $1,000 to $5,000 if you're actually budgeting for this. Drum roll please. All up, my total expenditure was $33,000. I went about $3K over budget, and honestly, I'm not that sad about it. I've got a hell of a car and I'm quite proud of it. Yeah, sure, I could have cut corners. I could have not put on like wheels and tires or a winch or something like that, but the reality is that it needs to be safe to go full driving, and you kind of need all this stuff. That's the absolute minimum that I could have done this build for. I had $6,000 worth of stuff lying around in the shed, which has made this a lot easier for me. Also, I was lucky enough to have some parts sponsored, and that just went over the $5,000 limit. There was no penalty for going over budget. I honestly think it's money well spent for the car that I have, and I reckon I'm going to have the best powertrain of the lot of them. Definitely the most drivable and best on fuel. I also had about $1,000 worth of spares that wasn't counted in the budget, so massive shout out to Spares Box for helping me out with an alternator, a crank angle sensor, and a swivel hub rebuild kit. Those are the absolute bare minimum spares that I would carry for this car, and I'm still learning the conversion, so I'm going to end up carrying more spares than this. Let's have a look at this next chart, and this is actually the RRP on everything that I used. I was savvy, I got good deals, I was able to source a lot of cheap parts due to my Instagram stories, and shout out to everyone that has helped me out. That's not to say you can't get good deals as well, but getting a good deal does require a lot more time and energy, so you got to factor that in. If you were to buy all this stuff new or at market value, drumroll please, you'd be spending 39K. Now let's break that down by categories. The most expensive parts of this build were the accessories: wheels, tires, winch, UHF, locker, compressor, and bar work. The second most expensive part was all that engine conversion gear. There's pretty much $6,000 I spent with Fusion Fab for various hardware parts and software support like unlocking the ECU. There's also a lot of other costs associated with the conversion. A lot of the plumbing, for example, seems quite innocuous at the time, but it adds up quite quickly. And I could have done it for cheaper. There are ways around it, like I didn't have to add a secondary fuel filter. But you have to remember the poor man pays twice. The last thing I want is a blown motor or a critical leak that stops the car from driving in the middle of nowhere. The X5 and the 60 series cost also form about 10K of the budget. And there's a heap of misc stuff as well, like maintenance items and other things that formed about 2K. This chart is not a requirement for Buildwars, but I have the data and I'm showing you this because I want you to know what you could expect if you wanted to build something like this and you were willing to do all the custom design work yourself. The next section includes labour, and this is what you could expect to pay if you were paying a shop that was doing it for the first time and there were no parts available off the shelf. Again, it's not a requirement for Buildwars, but I just want to show you how long everything actually takes. Really important to note, I've just picked an arbitrary rate of $150 per hour, which seems to be the average rate for most shops that do custom work. I tallied up all the hours in all the jobs that I've shown you throughout this series, and it came to 332, or about 8 weeks working full time at this. The reality is though, it actually took 12 weeks. And not 12 weeks of 40 hours a week, 12 weeks of maybe 60 hours a week, which would effectively double the labour estimate. There's a bunch of labour I haven't included for small innocuous jobs that would just add up. There's labour I haven't included for running around buying parts and cars. Here's a list of actual jobs that I completed. And there's so many things there that I haven't shown on the screen. It's actually wild when you look at it. We've done a lot of work in 3 months. Things that I haven't shown because I just ran out of time to film, or I just don't find it interesting myself, so I don't want to film it. Things like all the mechanical work conducted on the car, like all the oils, filters, bolt checks. I had to bleed the brakes, swivel hub rebuild. I had to also install diff, transmission, and transfer case breathers. I put a fire extinguisher in. Shaking the car down and troubleshooting associated problems with the conversion actually took weeks, but I haven't included them in my labour estimate because I didn't really keep track of them, so I'm not sure how to count them. So with all that in mind, the total labour bill comes to $56,000. But in reality, I think it would be anywhere from $70,000 to $90,000 if you included all of the stuff that I omitted. This brings the total build cost, including labour, to $95,000, which seems expensive, but in reality, I think if a shop was to do this, it'd be around the 120K mark. People often ask me, how much does something like this cost? And this is the first time I've actually done the math to figure it out. And my conclusion is, custom work is bloody expensive. If you want to do these types of projects long term, invest in tools and invest in yourself. That 55K worth of labour would buy you a fully kitted out shed of Kincrome tools, welders, machinery from Hare & Forbes, CNC plasma table, 3D printers, etc. And don't worry about getting a setup like this overnight. Add to it methodically like I have over a number of years so it feels free. Teach yourself CAD, 3D printing and welding, and the world is your oyster. You can make absolutely everything you want. Next week, we take all our vehicles down to Tasmania to test them out on some of the toughest tracks in the country. You do not want to miss this.
This car is off its head.
Make sure you tune in to TJ and Mac's channel tomorrow night as they complete the world's fastest come and swap. I just want to say a massive shout out to everyone who has helped me out with this build, and a massive, massive thank you to my interns who have designed and manufactured a bunch of parts on this car. And if you're Melbourne based and you need an engineering internship to complete your degree, hit me up. I've got plenty of projects for you.